At 08:43 hours on November 2nd, 1944, Lieutenant Amos Harker climbed into the cockpit of his P-47 Thunderbolt at Wormingford Airfield, Essex, and taped a piece of wire to his windscreen. A bent wire, salvaged from a maintenance crate, soldered to a small brass ring he had shaped himself over 3 evenings with tools borrowed from the base mechanic's shop. The other pilots in the 56th Fighter Group watched from the dispersal area. A few of them laughed. One of them asked if he was going to hang his laundry next. Harker didn't respond. He had been thinking about the problem for 4 months. The standard N-3B optical gun sight issued to every P-47 pilot in the 8th Air Force calculated deflection, the lead angle a pilot needed to hit a turning, banking, diving target, using a fixed reticle and a gyroscopic ring. It worked. On paper. As in practice, at 400 miles per hour, with adrenaline compressing your judgment into milliseconds, pilots routinely shot behind crossing targets by margins that put entire bursts into empty sky. The USAAF knew this. Studies conducted by the Operational Research Section showed that American fighter pilots consumed an average of 2,400 rounds per aerial kill. The Germans, using a Rev-16B reflector sight with similar limitations, were burning through comparable ammunition. The problem wasn't courage, it wasn't training, it was physics, and nobody at Wright Field had handed anyone a solution. Harker had grown up in Moline, Illinois. His father repaired farm equipment. By 14, Harker could diagnose a seized hydraulic pump by sound alone. He enrolled in mechanical engineering at the University of Illinois in 1939, and left after 2 years when the war came, and earned his wings at Luke Field, Arizona, in April 1943. He arrived in England with 312 flight hours, an average score on the gunnery range, and a notebook full of calculations that his squadron commander, Major Philip Tukey, described as either genius or the ramblings of a man who needs more sleep. The notebook contained Harker's theory that a pilot's primary accuracy error wasn't computing deflection, it was tracking. Pilots fixated on the enemy aircraft's fuselage. They aimed at where it was, not where it would be when the rounds arrived. A simple fixed reference point positioned at the correct angular offset from bore sight, Harker argued, would force the eye to track ahead of the target automatically. Not a calculation, a discipline. He tested it first on a broomstick in his billet, and then on a range camera mounted to his gun port. The film showed something the N-3B couldn't claim: consistent lead. Not perfect. Consistent. He brought the footage to Tukey in August. Tukey looked at it for a long moment. "You made that in your room?" "The machine shop," Harker said. "Mostly." Tukey approved 3 operational trials. The results over France were inconclusive. The missions were escort duties, the Luftwaffe hadn't appeared in strength, and Harker's 2 confirmed kills in September were at ranges where any sight would have done the job. The other pilots filed the device under eccentricities and moved on. November 2nd was different. The 56th was tasked with penetration support for the Merseburg oil raid. About 328 B-17As of the 1st Bomb Division needed shepherding through a corridor that the Luftwaffe's JG-3 and JG-300 had turned into a killing ground. The Germans had changed tactics that autumn. Instead of slashing attacks through the bomber stream, their FW-190A8As were coming in from 12 o'clock level, diving at closure speeds approaching 600 miles per hour relative, making a single high-deflection firing pass and breaking away before American fighters could respond. In those conditions, the N-3B was nearly useless. The geometry moved faster than the gyro could compensate. At 09:47 hours over Halle, JG-300 hit the lead bomber box. Harker was flying high cover at 26,000 feet. Below him and to his left, he counted 12 FW-190s coming out of a 20-degree dive, contrails shredding off their wingtips. Our cannon fire already reaching into the lead B-17 formation. He pushed forward on the stick and went after them before his flight leader had finished calling the bounce. He took the rearmost 190 at a 90-degree angle crossing shot, the textbook impossibility. The wire sat 2 degrees ahead of the cockpit. His thumb touched the trigger. 8.50 caliber M2 Brownings fired in a single burst. The 190's engine cowling came apart. It nosed down, trailing black smoke, and didn't recover. He had been in the fight for 11 seconds. What happened over the next 19 minutes has been reconstructed from gun camera film, formation reports filed by the 384th Bomb Group, and the post-mission debriefs of 6 pilots from the 56th. Harker fired 1,840 rounds, and he confirmed 9 FW-190s destroyed, 6 more probable strikes that were never officially counted. 3 German pilots bailed out. He broke off engagement only when his ammunition counters read 0. 9, 1 sortie, 1 bent wire. The 384th lost 4 aircraft that day, instead of the projected 14. Immediate aftermath, Major Tukey met Harker on the hard stand before the props had stopped turning. He didn't say anything at first. He walked to the nose of the P-47, looked at the wire still taped to the inside of the windscreen, and turned around. How many rounds per kill? About 200, Harker said. The standard was 2,400. Within 48 hours, 8th Air Force Headquarters had requested a full technical report. A team from the Armament Laboratory at Wright Field arrived at Wormingford on November 7th. They brought cameras, calipers, and skepticism. They left with photographs and orders to fabricate production samples. Protagonist's fate. Harker flew 31 more combat missions before VE Day. He added 4 confirmed kills to his total, for a final tally of 15, enough to qualify as the top ace of the 56th 63rd Fighter Squadron. He was offered a regular commission in the post-war Air Force and declined. He returned to Moline, finished his engineering degree at night school, and spent 30 years as a design engineer at John Deere's Hydraulics Division. He applied for 2 patents related to reflective sight geometry in 1947. Both were rejected on prior art grounds by the Patent Office, a decision he disputed until 1953 and then abandoned. He gave one interview to a local Moline paper in 1971, ad in which he described the November 2nd mission in 4 sentences. He died in 1989 at age 67. He was buried in Rock Island National Cemetery with a standard government marker. He never wrote a memoir. Historical legacy. The device Harker built was never formally adopted as issued equipment. The Armament Laboratory's production samples were tested at Eglin Field in January 1945 and deemed operationally promising but insufficiently refined for immediate standardization. The war ended before a second evaluation cycle could be scheduled. What changed was doctrine. The Operational Research Section's 1945 report on deflection gunnery incorporated Harker's gun camera film as a case study and recommended that training programs place greater emphasis on tracking discipline rather than sight mechanics. That recommendation worked its way into USAAF gunnery manuals and later into early Air Force doctrine, where it remained an instructional principle through the Korean War era. The broader problem Harker identified, that standard deflection sights demanded a cognitive calculation that combat conditions made nearly impossible, was solved differently by different air forces. The British gyro gun sight, the CSGS Mark II IID, came closer to automating the process. American aviators in Korea flew with a variation of it. Modern helmet-mounted cueing systems eliminate the problem entirely by slaving the weapon to the pilot's line of sight. Harker's wire did it with geometry, patience, and about 40 cents worth of brass. Final reflection. The men who laughed on the Wormingford dispersal that morning weren't wrong to laugh. A bent wire taped to a fighter's windscreen looked like nothing. It was nothing, until it wasn't. The gap between those two conditions was exactly the size of one man's willingness to keep a notebook and stay in the machine shop past midnight. 9FW190s found that gap the hard way. Call to action. If this story moved you the way it moved us, hit that like button. Subscribe for more forgotten stories from the corners of military history. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Thank you for keeping these memories alive.